Welcome everyone to the latest in our in-house in focus webinar series, where we'll be talking about AI, artificial intelligence in practice. I'm Paul Knight, a partner here at Mills and Reeve, focusing on technology and commercial law. We're covering the topic of AI again because increasingly we're being involved in projects that involve the implementation and use of AI technology. So, for example, I'm currently advising an education provider wanting to use AI to help teach the English language and assess student performance. And I'm advising a government department procuring services that will make use of AI to deliver cost savings, amongst other things. So we thought it would be appropriate to discuss today what happens in practice when it comes to AI implementation projects and explore some of the risks that lawyers will need to be aware of. And I'm delighted to be joined by Dr. Phil Winder, who's a true expert in the field. Phil, do you want to introduce yourself and explain a bit about the work Winder.AI do?
Please, yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for having me. Hello, everyone. My name's Phil Winder, and I'm an AI practitioner. I run a couple of businesses. Winder.AI is an AI agency where we help our clients develop bespoke AI solutions. That started back in 2013. So I've been working in AI for longer than it's been AI. The industry has changed dramatically from sort of a pure data approach all the way through now to a generative approach, and that's been really fascinating. Excited to talk about how that has changed the risks involved. Our work typically involves developing AI solutions for clients. So one of the ones that I'll talk a little bit more about later on is about how we helped a US public organization develop a legal research tool, because I think that's relevant to this audience. But we are cross industry, so we work across many different industries on different problems. Recently, we've also branched out into the Gen AI space. In particular, we have a product company called Helix ML, and that's developing a secure, private, on-premise Gen AI platform for users of Gen AI that have sensitive data and can't afford to transmit that data to third parties. That might come up as well. I'm also the author of O'Reilly's Reinforcement Learning. That was my COVID project, so that was fun. So um, I think without further ado, let's crack on with the content. Thanks, Paul.
Well, and one of the reasons it's great to be able to have this discussion with you, Phil, is to help us lawyers understand what it is we don't know.
Mm.
So I'm going to try and prick your brains a bit to demystify AI for lawyers. Um, and Phil, I guess you'll probably ask me some questions too, and we're sort of aiming to share practical takeaways. This slide that everyone can see summarizes the points we're intending to cover today, but this is very much going to be a conversation rather than a presentation. So perhaps if we take the slides down now and sort of get into the discussion. Um, I guess in terms of relevance to you, the audience, as in-house lawyers, my guess is that you're probably working at an organization that's either already implementing AI or will do so in the not too distant future. So I suspect you'll be expected to understand the issues, and you may even have contracts for AI implementation coming across your desks. Phil, I guess, are you seeing a wider range of organizations wanting to talk about AI implementation these days?
Yeah, definitely. So for the first nearly 10 years of the life of my business, I was primarily talking to other engineers. I was talking to, managers of engineers or CTOs, leaders of highly engineering-led organizations. And ever since the release of ChatGPT, which popularized the use of Gen AI, I've now been speaking to normal people, doctors, uh, risk assessors, lawyers, and I'd never spoken to those people before about a technical implementation of something. And the main reason for that was really it's the interface that was novel in this case. Though these models have been around for quite a long time, maybe not at the level of capability that they have now, but the underlying technological structure has been around since 2015 even. But really, it's when people can see and communicate with a model in natural language, that just opens the door to everyday people being able to access and leverage that model. So really, that's the main reason why I'm now talking to a wide variety of different industries that typically we would never have talked to before. So yes, definitely wide variety now.
So I guess everyone's talking about AI, but is it always clear what people are trying to achieve with AI or want to achieve with AI?
No, and I think the underlying goal. Well, so firstly, people come to me and say we want to do AI, which is I really dread the statement because it really means that they're not entirely sure what they want to do, and then we have to spend a long time trying to figure out what it is they're trying to do. Most of the time, when I'm speaking to people, it means they are looking to do some kind of automation, and quite often that tends to be a traditional business process automation. And there are a wide variety of traditional technologies which can achieve the task quite easily without AI. So quite often I am talking myself out of a job by recommending that they don't need AI for what they're trying to do. They just need a workflow solution. So not a great salesman, I'm afraid.
I guess, yeah, let's sort of come back to what that means in practice in terms of the way you approach projects,
Yeah.
perhaps a bit later. But do you feel people are alive to the risks from a legal perspective with AI?
I think that well, it depends where they're coming from. It depends on their background. If they're coming from a an industry or they have a use case where there's clear risk involved, then typically they are aware of what the risks could be. They might not know the direct implications of how AI can contribute to that, but they usually do have some level of awareness. Those that maybe don't have an awareness of the implications um, are typically coming from a use case that has low risk involved, and so they haven't needed to think about the risks, if that makes sense. So I think I think on the whole, I would say that the people that need to know that they need to know about something about the risks of using AI, they kind of do.
Yeah, because I guess as I see it, there's sort of um, there's intellectual property infringement risk and concern, and there's some sort of high profile litigation going through that in the High Court at the moment in terms of the Getty Images and Stability AI case, where Getty are saying that Stability AI have used a number of their images, the Getty owned images, without permission to train the AI model, which feels like that's kind of from a lawyer's perspective the scary risk. You don't know what's been used to, if you don't know what's been used to train the AI model that you're looking to implement. Um, have you come across sort of examples of issues arising in practice, Phil, on that?
Yeah, so it gets quite tricky at this point because we quickly need to dive into the underlying technology. So maybe if I just give a really high level recap. So when people talk about AI today, they generally mean generative AI, and when they talk about generative AI, they typically mean using a what's known as a foundation model, and this is a model that is trained by usually a large company on a very large amount of data. And the reason why it's a large company that does this is because it's very computationally and time, it's very costly. You've got to effectively scrape the entire internet, and then you have to clean the entire internet, which is not an easy task. And then you need to train your model. And so that's really hard. It takes time and it takes a lot of computational power. These foundation models are then used in many cases by downstream applications, and they do that via prompting these models to behave in different ways. You ask it to behave like a doctor, behave like a lawyer, answer these questions. So that's kind of the typical use case that most people are talking about. But companies, especially more technical ones, are also training their own models. Again, quite often they start off with a foundation model and then they fine tune it or they improve the model with their own proprietary data. So there's multiple risks involved here. You've got the underlying model that you're starting off with, and then you've got your own model which you're using with your own content, and they all have different risks. Obviously, the foundation models, if you're coming from a lawyer's perspective, then you should be looking to offload the risk of uh, um, the the litigation risk off to the supplier of that foundation model. And then anything that you do yourself, then obviously you need to be careful of. But yeah, it's also key to remember that this is just one small branch of AI. There's a huge discipline of more traditional machine learning where you are training models, again, usually on proprietary data. And that's been happening for decades, like a long, long, long time. So it's not like this is a completely new thing. This has always happened. It's just the fact that these models are now sucking up so much data. It's obviously touching upon some, yeah, sensitive data.
And does that mean, particularly for the sort of newer models, um, well, how reasonable is it to be asking the AI supplier, what have you trained this model on? What,
It's
can
a
you give?
reasonable question. However, they may not be able or willing to give an answer. So in the open source world, so the foundation models typically come in two forms. They come pre-packaged as a service, so think OpenAI, or they come as a something you can download, and they call it open weight. So that's basically something you can download onto your own hardware, onto your own computer, or onto your own servers and run that. And there's also open source as well, which is where they've provided all of the model weights and all of the information about where they've got the data from. So there's kind of a spectrum of transparency over where that data came from. So, for example, I think that this is an interesting direction to take. It just depends whether the market actually pushes for it. So people, service providers like OpenAI, Anthropic, etc., they will never provide the sources of their data because that is their competitive advantage. Their curated data, which has effectively become their own proprietary data, is a competitive advantage over another company because that data is bigger, better, higher quality, things like that. And that's kind of one of the reasons why the French company Mistral kind of came out of nowhere. And it was because they generated a better multilingual data set than OpenAI or anybody else had. And this is a year or two ago. They suddenly came from nowhere purely by curating content in other languages, which nobody had really done before. Um, so I think it's a reasonable question to ask. Whether they give an answer is a different matter entirely. Yeah,
But then, yeah, as you say, you can offload the risk as a customer. You can offload the risk onto the supplier, and
yeah,
you can do that through the classic indemnity route. So
exactly. Yeah.
indemnity against IPR infringement claims being brought as a result of your use of the AI system. Um, and I suppose another risk that sort of sits there with use of AI is inaccurate output,
hmm
isn't it? And so what if the AI model gives an unexpected answer? I guess have you seen some sort of well potentially amusing or problematic examples of that?
Oh, there's many amusing examples. But yeah, there's certainly some dramatic ones from a legal perspective as well. I think some of the best ones I've come across over the years. There was a church in Lucerne in Switzerland that was that got into the news because they reported to be the first church to provide you with a digital Jesus. So they took a foundation model and fine-tuned it on the Bible, and then allowed their parishioners to go and ask questions of this digital Jesus. So that was good. Yeah, some high quality failures. I remember about 4 or 5 years ago when this was first starting, there was a project from Microsoft called Tay, and they had the interesting idea of attempting to retrain and update the model based upon the responses that people were providing. So again, this was a tactic for them to try and capture data, capture real life data. But unfortunately, people realized that it was actually being trained on the fly. And so people started to send some very horrific comments, and eventually the chatbot started saying some very nasty things. And it took about 24 hours going from release to completely broken and turning into a fascist. Um, More recently, when companies start using services like AI services like OpenAI or etc. People are connecting them up directly to their user-facing applications, and quite often that results in issues. There's been a couple of high-profile cases. One especially in the US, there was an Air Canada chatbot that said that a user, a customer could have a refund for a specific purpose. And then the company turned around and said, no, that actually you can't have a refund for that. It's against our terms of service. And a court forced them to adhere to what the chatbot said. So they had to give the customer a refund. In the UK, there's been a couple of more like brand reputational risk incidents. Virgin Money had a chatbot on their website, and the main reason was the chatbot decided to try and reprimand one of their customers for using the word virgin because it was not appropriate for a business transaction. And DBD are another example who disabled their chatbot sometime last year because it started swearing at customers, and also it described the owner of the chatbot DBD as the worst delivery service in the world. So yeah, again, that was taken offline as well. And primarily, like these risks are there because we are asking these foundation models, which are just predictive models. They predict the text that they're trying to output, and these predictive models are very good in many cases. You know, when we're asking very vague questions, it has to predict what the question is and what the answer might be. And sometimes when a user is providing the context, some questionable context, then the the agent can the foundation model can start predicting things off the rails. So really, there are technical ways to help prevent this, but fundamentally, we want these models to predict these words. That's why they are useful in the first place.
And so, yeah, in terms of guarding against the risk of the sort of inaccurate output, etc. To what extent, well, are there things like human oversight that help with managing that risk? I guess the airline example you gave, there probably wasn't much time for interjection for and human oversight of the answer the chatbot gave.
Yeah, there's to be honest, there's a wide variety of potential ways of attempting to curtail the outputs that can be made, and it depends on the application. You have to um, analyze the risks involved to ascertain whether it's worth the effort to go to the extent to implement any of these ideas. But there can be a range of things. So for mission critical decisions like that, and even again, this applies to traditional AI as well. So going back to the classic example of a machine learning algorithm deciding whether you should get a loan or not, then in those cases, it's recommended when you've got borderline cases, you should always then defer that judgment to a human, an individual, and so that's an obvious kind of quality assurance gated step in the process to prevent the model from making any decision. You can apply guardrails to basically attempt to detect when the chatbot is suggesting things that are going outside of its remit. You can improve your testing procedures and your QA procedures. One of the most effective ways, actually, in any software engineering project is to build better tests and improve your monitoring. That's kind of applicable across the board in many projects. And yeah, it's lots of things like that, sort of technical, part process, part technical implementation, yeah, ways of de-risking this.
So don't be too quick to want to go live with
Yeah,
the.
yeah. Well, just take a risk-based approach. Make sure you've done a proper risk analysis of what could happen, and then try and mitigate them as much as possible. Oh, another important one that I mentioned was, and this I hate the word. It came up again yesterday. We heard some people chatting about it, and it was a couple of old people, and they were worried about how AI can hallucinate and it can dream and all this kind of thing. And it's a horrible word, but again, because we're asking these models to predict, we're asking these models to not necessarily base things on fact, but guess what the next output should be. Sometimes I can make things up. And there are, again, processes that you can put in place to try and alleviate that. One of the ones that we use quite often is we have a repository of, we often, in many cases, have a repository of source data. And then we can search that source data to find any matching concepts, matching keywords, matching things, and then say, actually, this output was grounded in the fact that we can see this document. And if you'd like to refer to it, then please see this link, something like that. And that really helps avoid the perception of hallucination.
And yeah, and I suppose yeah, as lawyers, we probably want to be thinking about our organizations in terms of use with our customers that are going to
Mhm.
be engaging with AI if it's use of AI in a public facing context or customer facing context.
Absolutely, yeah. I'm not sure of any UK cases that have actually tested this, but I do remember a US court case where basically it was a company against OpenAI. I can't remember who it was actually, but oh, there it was. Oh, yeah, I don't know who it was. It was just a person's name against OpenAI. But basically, they were asserting that OpenAI. Um, uh, Said something bad about that company, but they were that charge was dismissed based upon the disclaimers that OpenAI had in their application. They said that well, yeah, they have extensive disclaimers, and so that was successful in that case. You probably know a lot more about the
Well, it's a
disclaimers that are
relief to
required than
hear.
I do.
Yeah, it's a relief to hear that sometimes those disclaimers work. Hey,
Yeah.
um, yeah, I guess another concern for UK and indeed EU lawyers will be the sort of data protection
Mm.
because it's a hot topic in the UK and there's sort of fear, I suppose, that what you might lose control of data, particularly personal data, if it's input into an AI model. But actually, am I right in thinking there are various different sort of options available that can help manage that risk?
Yes, there are. And yeah, going back for the reason to do this, there's a wide variety of terms of service uh, offerings from all of these different providers, and it goes from one end of the spectrum where we keep all of your data, we use all of your data, we use it to retrain our models, so on and so forth, all the way through to it's your own, it's sort of fully under your control. Data doesn't leave your premises or secure environment or whatever. And there's a whole swath of of companies in between. And the most high profile ones here are OpenAI again have admitted that they are indeed logging every single request that goes to their server. And that's mandated by a US court case that requires them to do so. So you've got kind of that aspect. You've got like the cloud providers, which are typically somewhere in the middle. You know, they offer quite resilient guarantees that your data is not shared or used or exposed. However, if you are still in a certain jurisdiction, then you have to abide by the laws of that jurisdiction. Like in the US, you've got the US Patriot Act, which gives um, the US government the ability to access any server, any hardware, any data at any time. And in the UK, we have equivalent laws and yeah, all sorts of agencies looking at data. Uh, and really, so really, what you've got to do is you've got to assign a risk profile to this. Like, how risk averse are you to any of these potential avenues? Most people end up somewhere in the middle. They usually like the flexibility of using a managed provider. Maybe don't go all the way to OpenAI. They maybe use like an Azure, an AWS, a GCP somewhere. But there are still quite a few customers that we speak to that are even risk averse of that, and they have to have hardware in their own jurisdiction for legal reasons. So Germany is especially a fan of this. We have a few German customers which are entirely local only, and so they host their own hardware, sometimes in the basement of their premises, sometimes in like co-located sites. Um, they install their own models, they install their own hardware, they manage it themselves, and they entirely lock it down. So nobody has access apart from them. So yeah, sorry, long story short, there's a wide variety of technical options depending on how risk averse you are to this.
Yeah, and on the sort of on major projects that we're working with customers on, where they're sort of in quite a strong bargaining position, increasingly see, the customers really putting the onus on the suppliers to explain what's happening with the data and make sure that it's, the customer is getting transparency over how data is being processed because the customer then want to be able to sort of communicate that information to the data subjects, to the individuals whose data might be processed through the AI system.
Yeah, indeed, that then becomes a bit of a supply chain question. I think that's relatively straightforward to do when that data is under your control and you can explain exactly what you're doing with it. It's when it goes off to a third party and then there's an interface there that adds a little bit of um, lack of clarity on how the data is used. They're supposed to do the same, but obviously if they're not based in the EU or the UK, then they maybe don't have the same level of requirement to do so. So that I think I would think about that as a supply chain issue. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and it's possible, isn't it, for AI systems to automatically record the events, sort of, so create logs of interactions with the AI system, so that you can explain. It is possible to explain what happens with data and uh, how certain outcomes are obtained. That's fair to say, isn't it?
It's fairish to say. So again, there's a bit of a spectrum. So logging and describing activities in a software system in any process really that's been happening for a long time. Logging is a very standard practice for audit purposes, sometimes for regulatory purposes, but most often in my day job, it's mostly for the developers and the maintainers of these services to ensure that it's working properly and figure out what happens when things go wrong. Um, when we introduce an AI system into this, then you also have to consider the fact of how how the algorithm actually came to the decision it did. And again, this isn't appropriate for every single possible application and every use case. It's only applicable to certain use cases. But for certain use cases where the risks are high, like our mortgage application, like we mentioned earlier, it both seems morally right, and I think the UK's regulatory bodies also mandate that you have the ability to explain the decision that was being made. And so that places certain burdens on the model itself because it needs to be explainable, it needs to be understandable. Now, the main problem with that is that these new Gen AI models and many modern models, in fact, they are so big, they are they're massive. You can't even conceive the size of these models. It's next to impossible to actually calculate the reason why it came to the decision it did. Not because it's impossible, it's just because it would take too long to do. You would have to look at any of these billions and billions of individual calculations to be able to figure that out. And so it actually becomes technically infeasible to mathematically say why it made the decision it did. So you have to rely on a proxy to that. Um, you have to embed uh, external approaches in order to try and explain what was happened. And typically that does satisfy the regulators and it satisfies the users as well.
Thanks. And I suppose as lawyers, we might want AI models to be developed to meet certain standards or to adhere to certain standards. Are you seeing a market norm emerge on that front?
So again, it comes back to the use case. The standards that emerge are usually best practices, but they're guidelines that you should be aware of. They're not rules that you should follow every single time because the applicability of those guidelines depend on the risks involved, basically. So if you are working on a purely internal application that's never going to be used by anybody but you, for example, you don't need to go to the nth degree to log everything, to explain everything, to make sure it's secure and this, that, and the other. Whereas if you're working on a high profile, public, safety critical application for a 999 call center or something like that, then obviously that has a huge burden on implementing all of these best practices. And yeah, these best practices generally make sense. They're born out of decades of engineering, of software engineering, basically. Um, and yeah, but basically there's a limit to how much you should apply those guidelines depending on the application that you have in hand.
Yeah, and that whole point around there being different levels of risk with different AI systems. I mean that's sort of reflected in the EU AI Act, where you get the sort of unacceptable risk AI systems, which essentially banned.
Yeah.
Then the legislation talks about the high risk AI systems and sort of defines what those are. So AI systems used in products that fall under the EU's product safety legislation, like toys and cars and planes, medical devices, lifts, etc. And then high risk AI systems can also include, can't they, AI systems falling into specific areas like law enforcement or education. And then you have a number of obligations and requirements to meet in relation to high risk AI systems, not all of which then apply to limited risk AI systems, which is the sort of lower threshold and includes things like chatbots and emotion recognition systems and even deepfake AI systems. Um, so I guess there's a hope that the EU AI Act will help manage some of the risks that we've talked about, and perhaps it might drive uh, standard practice across the industry. Because I guess AI developers are going to want to adhere to the standards of that EU AI legislation, even if they're potentially looking to sort of service the EU market, even though it's not a legal requirement in the UK. Um, and I think in the UK we're still so we're waiting and seeing on the legislation of AI to a large extent. I don't know if people will have been following, but there was quite a bit of ping pong between the House of Lords and House of Commons over this data use and access bill, which finally got passed last week and is now awaiting royal assent. But the Lords were trying to introduce amendments to that bill about use of copyright material to train AI. So they were wanting to have more transparency around data scraping and use of text and data to train um, particularly GPAI models. Those amendments ultimately failed. So the legislation that's going to that has been passed and will receive royal assent doesn't address that issue. But I think as part of the compromise on that, the government has agreed to publish a report on its copyright and AI proposals, including what it's going to do, what it's intended to do about enforcement and AI models that are trained abroad. Um, so I think they're sort of committing to do that within 9 months of the bill receiving royal assent.
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting too. So I think there's a couple of points that I just want to remind people of. So yeah, two points. Firstly, uh, the every piece of regulation, every burden added by a regulatory regime or uh, best practices and guidelines, like you suggested before, that all adds cost because the providers of the services or maybe the developers that are actually developing this all takes time, and so that time is generally quite expensive, and so there is a cost element to this. So it's not as clear cut as you must do all of these things because it will inevitably be too expensive for the return on the investment. So there's always a compromise in all of this. And the second point, I think the challenge for developers actually is that AI and software in general actually is naturally globalized. We leverage resources both in terms of like hardware and people from all over the world to develop these systems, and and the things that are being produced are generally used by many people that are all around the world. So it can actually be really difficult to figure out what the regulation is because you don't know where it's going to run, who's going to use it, or who's going to develop it. Especially, when you're developing something that can be packaged and sent somewhere, like a model, for example. So I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, Paul.
No, well, I sort of keeping an eye on the time and sort of conscious there's 5 minutes
Oh, sorry.
left on that. So sort of wondering actually because I wanted to get onto the point around how sort of AI implementation works in practice and the
Okay.
if we can, if it's okay to get into the sort of agile approach that's very much the way things need to work.
Okay, of course, yeah. So traditionally, software and all projects were done in a waterfall manner. So that's where you basically plan out every task in advance. You try and agree some kind of timeline with enough flexibility to deal with any issues that arise, and then you deliver a result. And it's been proven time and time again that that way of working doesn't work very well, and it doesn't work for a number of reasons. Firstly, it means that users don't get the solution they want for a very long time because you've got to wait until the end of that waterfall before it's complete. And the second one is that many, especially in AI, many things are uncertain and are research projects in their own right. They may not succeed. And so if that happens in the middle of your waterfall, the whole project is abandoned and the money is lost. And so generally as engineers and also as the technical industry in general, we adopt a much more phased approach, a much more iterative approach, where we are delivering fast and early, and we are iteratively improving that product to meet the ultimate goals of the project. And so that has an impact on contracts because procurement in particular and sometimes lawyers, they like to have well-bounded fixed costs for things. But that is a waterfall approach. That's not an agile approach. That's not an iterative approach. And so, me as a small business owner we have to have arguments and sorry, not arguments, conversations and compromises with our clients to try and bring it back into this agile world. And that you typically the way we do that is by phasing the project. We do like a proof of concept, and then like an MVP, and then like a production ready version, and then a support contract or something like that. And that tends to be okay for most people.
Yeah, and so you could do that through a series of statements of work under
Exactly. Yeah.
a sort of master services agreement type
Exactly.
setup. Yeah, and just make sure that the you know an an implementation plan allows for that
Mhm.
flexibility. Um, and I suppose it's probably worth sharing some of the success stories, Phil. You particularly in the legal sector.
Yeah, quickly. Yeah, so I think the one I wanted to highlight, oh, that's really unfortunate. We were having some work done on the house and they just started drilling into the foundation. Sorry, I'll keep going and apologies. Yeah, the one I wanted to highlight was work we did for a US university, Temple University. They have a legal research department, and their goal is to research the US law, which is quite fractured and fragmented, and provide the public with certain answers. So, for example, if I, as a renter in an individual city, like what are my eviction rights? Because that differs at like a federal level, a local level, a state level, and people just don't know where they stand. The problem with this approach though was it took weeks, potentially months, for the legal researchers to read all of the relevant law and develop the answers to these questions. So we developed a Gen AI powered solution quite early on. This was like 2021, I think. So this was just prior to OpenAI really blowing up. Um, and we helped we built a solution that helped them research the question, i.e., find the relevant laws of interest and the relevant sections in the various laws. Uh, B helped to codify the questions, so they would come up with questions that they wanted answered, and the tool would help try to answer that. Obviously, it was all sort of validated by the human in the end. And then C, yeah, helped the actual users of the application find things of interest with semantic search and question answering and stuff. So that was a really successful project. It was a great project because it was for the public good, which is always great to work on. And it used Gen AI and is in the legal sector. So yeah, highly relevant.
That's brilliant. I think we've had a number of questions submitted, which is fantastic. We're up against it in terms of it's now 10:45, so I think we'll end up having to follow up with most of the questions separately. Phil, I don't know if there's any that you looking through think there's a quick answer that you want to share. I know there was a question about indemnity options, so that that is easier to implement when you're sort of negotiating a contract with a particular supplier for AI implementation. It, you wouldn't typically probably see an indemnity being given in a supplier's standard terms that you would click to agree. But that comes back to your point earlier, Phil, about there being sort of different terms of service, there being a wide variety of different terms of service, and so it is important to do the analysis of what the terms of service being offered are. Um, if, are there any other ones, Phil, that you've spotted where you can give an answer? Shall we follow up with all of those separately because we've got some tips and takeaways, haven't we?
I think considering the drilling that is happening right now, I think it's probably best if we follow up rather than make everyone listen to that.
So, in terms of takeaways, if we can get the slide back up, we have called out some example model clauses that are published. They're in the public domain that are useful to refer to if you are looking to enter into a sort of negotiate a contract for AI implementation. So the first set of clauses are published by the Society for Computers and Law AI group. They've actually done two separate versions of the clauses. There's the as you can see, artificial intelligence contractual clauses, and then there is a separate set of clauses that are written specifically with the EU AI Act in mind. And then also, and even more recently, the EU public buyers community, so the community of practice, has sort of updated model contract clauses for public procurement of AI solutions, and they've got a full version, as they call it, for high risk AI, and a light version set of clauses that's aimed at the non high risk AI. So I do recommend, if you are needing to look at or think about what clauses do I put in my contract, looking at those sources. And then just to quickly trail, our next in-house in focus session is on the 16th of July. And it's about demystifying governance. So please do, if you think that's going to be interesting, and I'm sure it will be, please do sign up for that one. And we look forward to seeing you there. Thank you very much.